Okay, welcome back. Normally this presentation, so I directed you in the other video to the EFC Formula Guide, and that's the main component of determining EFC. I mean, you guys can read through the criteria. This video is going to be just briefly. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I feel like for our purposes, we don't really need too much detail on like the ins and outs and the figures. Oops, apologize for that. So here's, I will, these I guess handouts are available on the classroom, and I think what I'll do is I'll download them and re-upload them to the actual topic for EFC based on the different topics that we're covering. But I just wanted to go through because I do think that there are some core components in this presentation that are valuable. So need analysis, when someone talks about financial need, really what they're talking about in the financial aid world is about federal need, right? Or so need defined by this formula, which is cost of attendance minus EFC gives you your financial need. That is the standard formula that is used across all institutions in the nation for federal aid purposes. Now, every campus might have different criteria in determining how they assign their own institutional aid or how they assign maybe their various state programs that they have in different states. But when it comes to federal gift and federal loan, this is the formula that's used to determine the type and amount of federal aid that a student will be assigned. If you want to think of it in a visual, let's go over here to this presentation and kind of think of financial need as like a bar like this, right? We're working with two ceilings. We're working with the overall cost of attendance, which is this full 3 sections. But we're also working with that student's need, right? So this is your first ceiling and this is your second. So when we're considering how to package students, both of these come into play. Now for some students whose EFC winds up calculating out to 0, these two numbers will be the same. And so this bar, this whole thing would be need in that student's case. But for other students who have a positive number here, let's say 1,000, then this block would be 1,000 in terms of the expected family contribution. And what that means, just as a reminder, EFC does not mean that that's what the family is going to pay. EFC is a financial barometer that's used to determine the types and amounts of federal aid that the student will receive. Just know that if this number is positive, the only type of aid we can possibly use to meet that EFC is non-need based aid. So that's pretty critical, okay? Because when we're, for example, revising students' aid, we cannot replace the EFC with gift aid, meaning we can't fill a student's cost of attendance with all gift aid if they have a positive EFC, because they only have room for so much need-based aid. So what are a couple of versions of non-need-based aid? Well, that would be your unsubsidized student direct loan, as well as your federal parent loan. And that typically is what's used to kind of help fill that gap, okay? So we're going to go back to the other piece. And actually, I will say, let's just get down to definitions. So here are some definitions for each of the components that we'll be working with, and that you'll, if you aren't already familiar, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pull out these 2 slides and maybe print them off for you or post them to the topic. But just note that these are the definitions of each of these components. And remember, cost of attendance less CFC gives you your financial need. Now at the UC system-wide, we also have a term called self-help, or what we tell parents and students, loan work expectation. And basically that's part of our financing model, where UC believes that the student needs to invest in their own education as well. And so this self-help will vary by campus and vary by student population at each campus, depending upon that campus's kind of policies. But what this does is we take this amount off of the need to determine our own institutional aid. So we'll get more into that when we talk about packaging. All right, so let's move on. So as I mentioned in the other video, you're going to go over the different formulas, but basically those formulas are referred to as a federal methodology. So some institutions have their own institutional methodology, and the difference between the two is essentially that an institution can determine what components they include in their formula. But the federal formula is very static. No one can change the federal formula, okay? It's set in place by law. So it's a method for assessing the ability to pay, and it consists of these 2 steps, right? Measuring a family's financial strength as well as assessing what portion of their resources they can contribute towards educational costs. Resources meaning both liquid and non-liquid assets. And then that's used to determine the EFC. Now, if you recall in the other video, well, there's 3 types of formulas, and 2 of those have to do with the student being independent. Well, what makes a student independent? There are several criteria that will automatically make a student independent. One is age. So if the student's going to be 24 by December 31st of the award year, meaning, for example, for the 2019-20 academic year, they have to be 24 by the end of this calendar 2019 year. Then they would be considered automatically independent. If they're in were in foster care or were the court at the time they were 13 or older, they're automatically, if they were independent. If they're emancipated minor, meaning that they received legal emancipation from their parents, or if they were in legal guardianship as determined by a court in their state of legal residence, then they're also independent. Here are a couple others. They're a veteran, active military, in the armed forces for purposes other than training, are an unaccompanied youth, meaning they lack fixed housing and don't have any connection with their parents, or if they're at risk of homelessness and are self-supporting at any point beyond July 1st of the award year. This is an old presentation, so you can this would be in this context like 2019. Okay. If they're married, if they're going to be a graduate student, if they have legal dependents other than spouse or dependent children, or this last one is if we as financial aid professionals make a professional judgment and make them independent because some sort of adverse home situation. So here are those 3 models again that I referenced in my last video. So I'm not going to go through these again because you're going to read about them. But just know that, I guess another clarifying point, the Auto Zero application is only available to dependent student formula and independent students with dependents other than a spouse. So meaning independent students who are married, for example, would not automatically get an Auto Zero. So they have to go through the full regular evaluation, which means we have to look at their income for them and their spouse, as well as the assets of them and their spouse. And this gets into like simplified needs tests, but you're going to read about this in the handout for the EFC Formula Guide, so I won't go through this. But just wanted to go through some of those points about dependency status and the cost of attendance, like the federal need formula, and why the federal methodology is so important as a starting point for determining financial aid. All right, and with that, I'm going to stop this.